All right, so next up is our Cosmos. And this one is the same as our satin stitch flower shape that we've done in a few spots. So I'm just gonna start in the center the same way we always have. I think I'm gonna start right in the dip part, which might not actually be like the full center. And the same thing for this one, we wanna stay on the outside of our line, which I know is kind of awkward to do because you're trying to follow the shape. But for this one, I'm going to follow it on the outside of that line. And if I'm consistent, I still keep the same shape. I just make it a tiny bit wider. You can hear the little pug in the background. Okay, so one straight stitch down what we're going to call the center, even though I'm not sure that's actually the center of that flower and then we're sidestepping right next to it and coming down and just kind of tucking it in behind. This one is pretty wide at the top, and the base is pretty wide too. So I'm just going to kind of maybe start with a 1 for 1 kind of staggered, especially in this middle section. Okay, and then tucking it in behind. I'm gonna make another short one actually, just because of the angle. And then now I'm kind of at the top, which puts it back on the kind of angle that I want it to be on to go nice straight down to the center. One of the things that I like to do is I like to hold my needle, or I like to hold my stitch. This is a great trick for if you're trying to figure out what something will look like once it's stitched down. If I know I want to go to the base, if I hold my strand like this, I can actually see exactly what it's going to look like once I filled that in, and see that I really only have like one more stitch down to the base before it's getting pretty full. So I'm going to do my little tuck. Maybe I'll do 2 of those. And then do a nice long straight stitch all the way down, right in beside my last one. And since we are going to be doing like our accent stitches, you want to be pretty, you want to keep a bit more, sorry, I'm trying to spit this out without it making no sense, and I'm not making any sense. You're going to have these little pink strands coming out of here too. So you're going to have even more stitches coming from this space. So don't overdo it with how many long stitches you have. Sometimes we have a little bit more leeway. Since we're going to be creating even more bulk when we add those, be more liberal with how many short stitches you do, because you're going to have an extra buffer too if there's gaps from where you're covering it with the accent stitches. You're already going to be adding more bulk to that center space, and you're going to, if there is a spot where you're like, oh no, you can tell that stitch is shorter, you will have those pink strands to come in, so you could just cover that space with some of the pink after. Kind of on a weird angle right now where I'm going to do another straight stitch. I'm like coming from kind of over the other stitches, which is okay. It's just the shape of this petal more than anything. I'm going to do a nice short one. And then I'm going to be back on the right, kind kind of shape of my lines. I think what people don't realize is how much, once you get all the stitches in there, kind of blends together. So they're worried that when they're doing the short stitches, you're going to be able to see it. But you can, it really does start to mesh together, and you won't be able to tell which strand comes from which spot pretty quick into the, once it's done. By now you should have a pretty good understanding of how to do these kind of staggered satin stitches, because you've done it on quite a few different shapes now, from little tiny ones all the way to big, like very asymmetrical shapes. So we are just going to do one petal. Nice thing about this one is each petal is very individual, so you don't have to worry about trying to worry about the edges where they blend together. And the next step is going to be our accent stitches, or straight stitches, or blending stitches, whatever we want to call. Accent stitches is what I call them. So I'm going to grab my pink 3354 in 2 strands, and I'll meet you back here to get that started. So for this, because you're only using 2 strands, I would suggest taking like a scrap from whatever you have left over from this rose, or taking a very small portion. Like I would take about this much off of one of your strands, like one of your sections of thread, which you'll have from this dahlia that we're still going to do. Because if you take the whole 6 like long piece and you split it into 2s, you're only going to need maybe one of those 2s, and then you've got 4 strands left over that aren't as functional. So my recommendation is to take like a smaller piece off, maybe 10, not even 10 inches, maybe like 6 inches, and we'll just stitch with a shorter piece. You'll have to, because you'll be able to split that into 3 to do this whole flower. And to be honest, you will not need a ton to do this. So you'll be able to use a smaller piece of thread. You'll just have to change your thread more, but you're going to get more out of your thread by doing that. So our little stitches, I cannot tell you exactly where to put these because it is not an exact science. So we're going to start how I do it with 3 longer stitches. It's always how I start. So those are probably going to be my longest ones, and they go not quite halfway into my petal. I'm going to do 3 of them. Then in between those 3, I'm going to put short ones. So you're kind of just varying the length and blending it to create sort of like the shading at the bottom of your petal. There isn't an exact science. I don't really see that longer one, so I'm going to throw one more long one in. And you just keep building on top of what you've already done. I want to go a little higher even. So I'm going to do one really long one in there. These shades are not drastic in a color difference, so you're not going to see a massive change until you've got like a decent amount of stitches in there. You won't even see some of it. So I just normally keep filling in with little stitches of 2 strands until I feel like you can really tell that the bottom is pink and that it blends into the kind of orangey color. So you're just throwing in those little stitches and you are all done. There is no magical formula for where to put them. You'd probably say like this half and then as short as like here. So filling in this sort of section. And you can see that on here. They go to about here and they stop about there. So I would say probably like anywhere between as little as 5, as many as 7, 9 stitches, just depending on what look you want. I want mine to have you really be able to see that pink because I really liked the way it turned out when I added quite a bit of pink. It's just got like a really pretty kind of ombre look. So there we are. You probably can finish that one and then we'll meet back for our French knots again. All right, now these French knots might be starting to feel a little redundant, but this is actually the time that you would do all of them. If you held off on doing them, now is your moment. So our French knots, we're gonna come up from the back of the fabric, we're gonna wrap our needle 1, 2 times, and then we're gonna slide our needle into the fabric, pretty much exactly where our thread came up. With our non-dominant hand, we're sliding our knot down to the surface of the fabric. I like to hold it on this kind of angle so that where I've wrapped it holds it tight, and then pulling it closed. So the idea is that once you've learned these tips, it makes it just that much easier to get them done, but they are a little finicky and they do take a little bit of, like, I've done so many French knots. Sorry, the tail from my French knot came through. I have done so many French knots that it is like muscle memory to me. 1, 2, needle into the fabric, pull your knot down, push your needle a little further, holding the tension but not holding too tight that you can't pull your needle through, and then close. But yeah, like and to be honest, if you will need probably 2 hands. So if you don't have a stand, which most people when they're stitching for the first time don't, there's a few options that you can use. You can lay it between a table and something really heavy to hold the hoop down. So if you lay something heavy on this portion of the hoop, and then you can use both hands. Or I used to sit on my sofa with my feet planted on the ground, and then I'd sandwich my hoop between my knees and hold it tight. Pretty much whatever works. Sometimes I would use like this part of my arm and sandwich it between my body. You just gotta do what works best for you and figure it out. If you have like a clamp, you could clamp it to a table. There's so many options, and you don't necessarily have to run out and grab a hoop stand. I don't actually use a hoop stand when I'm stitching just casually. I just hold it awkwardly and so that I can use both hands. All right, so our French knots, I think you've seen quite a few demonstrations of those, so you should be ready to get at those and get all of your French knots done. And I will see you soon for our sunflower.